Welcome to Contradicting the Cosmos, the show where I refute the YouTube atheist, Holy Koolaid. Wait, what? Holy Koolaid? It's supposed to be the Cosmic Skeptic. Oh, that's right. This is one of those crossover episodes, where the Holy Koolaid does Cosmic Skeptic's work for him, and in exchange Cosmic Skeptic goes over to their channel to do a video. Well, in that case, it's the show where I refute the YouTube atheist, the Cosmic Koolaid. In this episode, Holy Koolaid is taking on the subject of morality. Let's begin.
One of the most common critiques I get as an atheist is how can you have objective morals without God as your standard? As if there's no other standards for morality than divine command and natural law theory. Pulling the morality gun is the quickest way for a theist to dismiss all of the scientifically sound arguments an atheist makes about the lack of evidence for gods and their probable non-existence.
Where is your standard? You don't even have a standard. How can you come here and just say these things are right and wrong when you don't even have a standard? I'm telling you, without God, your morality is meaningless.
It's an ad hominem attack on character and nothing else.
Not even a little. Point 1. It is the atheist who brings up the subject of morality, usually in an attempt to switch the subject because they're losing the argument on the scientific front. That clip he showed was an obvious example of a theist responding to an atheist who made a moral claim, not a scientific claim. It's not the theist who is dismissing arguments. And in what way is this supposed to be an attack on character? It is an attack on the atheist worldview, not the character of the atheist who holds that view.
Asking how you can have an objectively moral framework without God is like asking how you can have an objectively good economic framework without the monopoly guy. Even presuming that morality is objective, why does it have to come from God? How do we know that God is good? Assuming a God exists, which I don't, why do theists begin with the assumption that God is good? What if she was bad? How could you tell? If God was evil but only ever did good things, then would he really be bad? And if he were good but he only ever did evil things, would he still be good? You would have to be able to determine what makes an action good.
And in order to determine what makes an action good, you need a standard, an objective standard. And this hypothetical of his is completely ridiculous. Just total nonsense. A being who is evil by nature cannot do good. That would be an oxymoron. Same with the being whose nature is good. He cannot do evil. Because God is the standard of good, he, by definition, cannot do evil. He can work evil for the good, but he cannot actually perform evil. Now, as any viewer of mine might be able to tell, I do not script my episodes. I basically respond to the clips as I bring them up. And even though I have already watched the video at least once, it's easy to forget details. So it is possible I may have to correct myself in the future, but he does not actually try an attempt to answer the question of what makes an action good. He gives some examples that other atheists have postulated, but mostly this video isn't about making an intelligent argument, just attacking Christianity.
Theists are often quick to say things like, who are you to judge the actions of God as moral or immoral?
How can you judge God as a creature?
The same Christians who say that also believe that we gained knowledge of right and wrong through original sin. They also claim we know right from wrong because being made in the image of God, it's in our nature. If morality is objective, never changing, and applies to all equally, which they claim it does, and if we know right from wrong, which they claim we do, then why can't we hold the actions of God to that perfect, never changing, objective moral standard? And when we do, we see that his actions, according to their holy book, can be pretty messed up.
First, I have to complain about the order of this list. Genesis is an obvious start. It's the first book. The next book is Exodus. Why is Exodus number 3 on this list? Why are the 2 chapters from Numbers separated by 2 different books? And then the 1 Samuel chapters, he's got 15, and then 6. Could Holy Koolaid really not be bothered to actually organize his list? Okay, now that I got that out of the way, the majority of these verses can easily just be responded by saying, God has the right to judge his own creation. We are only alive by the grace of God. And that judges reference doesn't even fit with this list. Those verses are about a man named Jephthah and what he did. It is not about what God did, nor does it make any claim about whether what he did was right or wrong. Now, what Mr. Koolaid claims to be attempting to do here is to show that God is not moral by his own standard, but he's failed to give any verses that would indicate that any of these verses are in contradiction to his standard. He's just throwing this argument out there and hoping that you believe him without any evidence to back it up. To this, Mr. Koolaid may say that he's judging these verses by the morality that's written on his heart, which I'm sure is what he intended. But the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. If you want to say that one of these verses contradict what you feel is right, then you need to be prepared to give an argument to why your feeling about what is right is actually what is right. But Mr. Koolaid does not give such an argument.
The idea that God gets angry if you eat or wear the wrong thing seems awfully petty, and the notion that he enforces punishment against violators of his wishy-washy preferences is rather tyrannical. If morality was perfectly laid out in their ancient books, why has it changed so much over time? Why are its rules so illogical, petty, and unjust? Most of the rules of the Old Testament we don't follow at all. Did God care so much about the Sabbath that for centuries breaking it ensured the death penalty? But then suddenly he changed his mind and it's okay to play tennis after dark on Fridays? That's not objective. And why are his commands so selective? Does God care that the Jews don't wear multi-fabric clothes, but for me it's alright to wear boxers that are only 50% cotton? That's not universal.
And we have more examples of him just making poorly thought out ad hominems against Christianity instead of actually dealing with the subject that he's supposed to be dealing with, and that is morality. Nothing he mentioned is morality. So he is actually just setting up a straw man. All the moral claims in the Bible can be summed up in 2 laws. Love God and love your neighbor. And this entire clip is just laced with question-begging epithets. Take your bets now as to whether or not in the next clip he actually tries to argue for how an atheist can have objective morality, or if he continues to just throw ad hominems at Christians, or Christianity.
If objective morality is naturally ingrained in us, as Thomas Aquinas proposed with natural law theory, then why does it vary so widely across cultures? Sure, rules like don't kill or don't steal arose independently across cultures, but so did human sacrifice, honor killings, polytheism, and religious orgies. You know something that's not globally universal? Monotheism, a orthodox approach to sexuality. The modern Judeo-Christian stance against abortion and euthanasia, bans against homosexuality, just to name a few. But it doesn't stop there. Here's a bacon cheeseburger. Seems perfectly okay to most Protestant Christians, and to a Catholic if it's not during Lent. But the Muslim can't have it if it comes with bacon or at all on raw.
And I'm cutting him off there, as you can tell, because dietary preference is not a moral issue. And morality does not vary across culture. Everybody inherently knows the difference between right and wrong. And everybody does what is wrong. The difference is which moral laws do which people break. For instance, the pedophile may say, well, at least I'm not a murderer, but the murderer may say, well, at least I'm not a pedophile. They are each doing what they know in their hearts to be wrong. They just prefer different sins than the other person. Now, there's one important thing to remember, though, with this clip. This clip, in his argument, he seems to imply that morality is subjective. But if morality was subjective, then there would be no such thing as morality. It is only if morality is objective that you can make a claim that anybody is wrong about anything, morally speaking. You couldn't tell someone they ought not kill if morality is just subjective. You may be able to say the words, but your words would carry no weight with them. If you want to make a rational argument about morality, about what a person should or should not do, then morality has to be objective.
And while everyone's freaking out about cheeseburger ingredients, Agori monks in India live off the cremated remains of people as part of their religious practices. People burgers. Tell me again how morality is objective and absolute across all cultures? If you think that's the case for even 1 second, then you've never traveled. Seriously, why are all moral rules different from one culture to the next if morality is ingrained in us and absolute? And why do you think that it's a bad thing that our morality changes? Morality continues to evolve and improve, thanks in large part to the Renaissance, to free-thinking scholars and philosophers of the Enlightenment, and contemporary secular activists.
Secular activists. You do realize one of those pictures was of Martin Luther King Jr., right? A Christian, a preacher. As for why it would be a bad thing for morality to change, pretty much just answered that in the last audio clip. Morality needs to be objective if you want to have any rational discussion about morality. But the objective moral law written on everybody's heart does not change. Different people respond differently to it, but the moral law itself is still objective.
Which is a good thing. Religions had people sacrificing their children to the gods, and they thought that was okay. Our stance towards women, slaves, homosexuals, torture, and just about everything in between has evolved, largely in the last century and a half. The notion that the best moral guidelines we have were laid down thousands of years ago and haven't changed since is grotesquely farcical.
Morality has not changed. Culture has changed, but morality has remained the same. And you'll notice the straw man he built up at the very beginning of this clip, saying that religion sacrificed children. He didn't specify which religion, he just lumped them all together. What is actually grotesquely farcical is somebody trying to make moral claims upon a subjective foundation.
The problem with religion is that while the rest of the world is upgrading and improving its morality to stay relevant in a rapidly developing world, religion steeped in ever-souring moral refuse is playing catch-up, and it's flat-out embarrassing.
I probably could have just skipped this clip altogether. It's just more of the same. He's saying his subjective morals are better than our objective morals, which is nonsense. He's trying to make objective claims about something that he is claiming to be subjective. And I do not see what he thinks is embarrassing about that picture he showed. I'm not going to bother screenshotting it. Just rewind and pause it. I'm certainly not embarrassed by that.
Now, there are plenty of people who think morality is subjective. Contractarianism, as put forth by Thomas Hobbes, suggests that moral frameworks are determined by social contracts that we reason up and lay down, trading some of our anarchistic freedoms in exchange for the security of a functional society. Things are wrong because we agree that they're wrong. But even if you disagree with this entire moral framework altogether, there are plenty of others. You can even believe in objective morality without God, as Immanuel Kant did with his reason-based categorical imperatives. Or, as ACT utilitarians believe, you can view something as objectively moral if it promotes the most pleasure and avoids the most pain for the greatest amount of people. It's not selfish or hedonistic because it's proposed in an other-focused framework. It does present a dilemma, though. If 5 people have different organs failing, and you're a match for all of them, under ACT utilitarianism, it would be moral to kill you, harvest your organs, and save the 5. Rural utilitarianism, however, addresses this, promoting pleasure and avoiding pain for the greatest amount of people in the greatest number of circumstances over time. No one wants to live in a world where they could be pulled at random from the street and organ harvested. That would lead to greater long-term suffering over time, with all of us living on edge in fear of losing our lives or our loved ones.
And finally, he puts a break on the Christian bashing to actually try and make an argument. The first one was obviously subjective, so we can just throw that out the window, but the other two rely on a certain presupposition, and that is the presupposition that we should promote pleasure or avoid pain. To really highlight this point, how is utilitarianism different than contractarianism? It sounds to me like utilitarianism is just one of those contracts. And of course we have the hypothetical problem with this. Under utilitarianism, if 2 people are stranded on an island and there's not enough food for both of them, would it be moral for the stronger one to overpower and kill the weaker one so that he can survive? Now, we all know from the answer written on our hearts that killing for survival in that circumstance would be immoral. But how would you argue that from a utilitarian standpoint?
John Rawls further added to our understanding of moral philosophy in the following way. Imagine any situation. For example, slavery. You have to decide if slavery should be legal. Imagine you're about to be born into a world where there's a 50% chance that you could be either the slave or the master, and you don't get to choose which. By wearing what Rawls referred to as the veil of ignorance, you have to make this choice blind, completely ignorant of your future. Having slaves may be convenient, but under the veil of ignorance, would you create a world in which slavery is legal? In which you could be the slave?
Of course not, because that question is completely subjective. And you're not just making that decision blind about what you will be. If you actually had the power to make that decision before you were born, you would not have enough information to make an intelligent decision. Unless you're God, you would not know all the different butterfly effects that would result from that decision. Let's throw some other hypotheticals in there. What if you could choose and you had a 100% chance of being the master? But a slave rebellion will result in your excruciating torture. Or you have a 100% chance of being a slave, but you're a slave in a very rich household, and you're even given a wife and children. You basically want for nothing. These hypotheticals do nothing to explain whether or not slavery is right or wrong. There are far too many variables besides your subjective opinion.
Now, there are many other theories for how we derive morality, and no one completely agrees on what's right and what's wrong all the time, how to determine it, and why. But the fact is, our models continue to improve. Is morality objective or subjective? Well, it depends on your model. We have objective moral standards outside of God, but we also have subjective ones. I found the best way to look at morality is as the economics of the ethical world.
Morals cannot be both subjective and objective. You don't get to just pick and choose. Just like I cannot pick and choose what color the sun is. It is objectively yellow. I do not get to decide, well, it's red for me. This is, of course, ignoring any semantical problems with that. We're not changing the definitions of words. Morality, at its foundation, is either objective or subjective. In fact, saying it could be either depending on your model is, by definition, subjective. So Mr. Koolaid's really just begging the question here. Remember, subjective morality is an oxymoron. It is not logically possible.
In the same way, there may be a perfect moral system that leads to the least suffering and the most well-being for the greatest number of people in the largest variety of scenarios. But until we find it, we're gonna keep improving our moral models. And I'm glad that's the case. I'm glad that most people don't butcher each other to appease the gods. Glad I can enjoy a bacon cheeseburger and a Coke. Glad we can come up with moral societies that enable all of us to prosper without being so damn draconian. And I'm hopeful that through reason and critical thinking, things are only gonna get better.
Oh, the irony. He hasn't done any critical thinking throughout this whole video, and yet he says he's hopeful that through critical thinking, things will improve. Well, I'm hopeful that he will start using some critical thinking before I actually get to debunking his videos. I especially hope he lays off the loaded language, because trying to respond to all the question-begging epithets is like trying to debate a 2-year-old. If you're gonna make an argument, don't layer it with so much empty rhetoric.